All right, hello everyone. Thank you all so much for taking the time today. We are going to skip the boogie, the normal boogie that we have at the beginning of today's session, just because I'm trying to be fancy with my technology and it did not work today. So we're gonna do that. But if you would like to hear the Marketer Meetup intro music to get going like we normally do, then do head to our YouTube channel because it's right there as well. So good afternoon. It's so lovely to have you here. Do drop in the chat where you're watching from. I'd love to see your messages come through right now in the chat feature. We've got Jefferson in London. It's just to the right hand side. We've got another London, Switzerland, Glasgow, Sunderland, Jersey, Swindon, London, Stockholm, Stroud. It keeps on going. South Africa, very important for today's guest as well. So thank you all so much for taking the time. It's such a blooming joy. It's been 2 weeks off for me, so thank you all for taking the time. If you haven't already, do switch to everyone in your chat messages. That means that if you head to your chat feature, some of you will right now see hosts and panelists. If that's the case, switch that over to everyone so everyone can see your messages, and we'll get going. We can see Stephanie in Cheshire, around in Exeter, bunches and bunches of people. Thank you for taking the time. So today, to introduce our guest, today we have Anthony Rose, who's the CEO of Seed Legals. Now, Anthony was called the man who saved the BBC by Wired magazine back in 2007, as he was the person who led the team behind the launch of the iPlayer, which is just a ridiculous thing to have on your CV. He's also a serial entrepreneur with an impressive array of businesses that has been involved with over the course of time. But the reason why I invited him along today is that I was one of Anthony's customers using his legal platform, Seed Legals. And I've got to say, oh my God, thanks, Charlotte. Thank you for that message in the chat. I really appreciate it. I got to say about Seed Legals, it was one of the most impressive interactions that I've had from a company. And I'm not being paid to say this, but it just nailed every level of the experience from start to end. And as part of that experience, I joined their WhatsApp group, and I've continued to learn from them ever since. That's what we'll focus on today, because having chatted with Anthony, they use it in interesting ways, and I think we can learn a lot about private communities and private social media from how Seed Legals do it. Today will function as a pure Q&A. I have some questions to make sure that we deliver on the promise of the session, but then after that we'll open the floor. So if you've got questions, please do use the Q&A feature, and we'll make sure to prioritise those questions as we go through. Before we get going today, I just want to say a big thank you to our sponsors, and now I can get fancy. Get fancy in our thing and change my screen and say a big thank you to Klayvio. Now, Klayvio, for those of you who know them, they're an email marketing software platform. And the thing that I think I should know about Klayvio is right now there's these changes coming into how Google and Yahoo are going to be dealing with spam. Klayvio over the next few weeks have a bunch of webinars that explain what these changes are and what you need to do about them. So if you want to find out a little bit more about that, then head over to Klayvio's website and sign up. It's all for free. It's very lovely. Also, a big thank you to our other sponsors who will speak about on rotation over the next few weeks. We've got Frontify, Exclaimer, Klayvio, Redgate, Cambridge Marketing College, and maybe you one day. If you would like to get in touch about sponsoring the Marketer Meetup, then do. As Simon says, I have some new toys, so that's pretty cool. With all that said, that's my introduction done. Quicker than normal because we didn't play the video like normal. So I should ask Anthony just for some context on Seed Legals, just to introduce it, just to make sure I covered all the bases.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Now, by the way, I don't fancy myself as a marketing person at all. I'm like a tech product guy. So it's a huge privilege and a bit out of my comfort zone to be here. And I'm totally delighted that my passion for customers has turned into something that got me invited here. So a bit about me, I'm looking at where everyone is. I'm originally from Cape Town. Then I was living in Australia for 20 years. And then one day I got a call from the BBC to head up iPlayer. This was before iPlayer launched. And I thought, the BBC, where are my stock options? But I was persuaded to join, moved to London in 2007 and headed up iPlayer from pre-launch to, help make it a success. After I left the BBC, I built a startup, sold it, invested in a few, got tired of paying lawyers, met my co-founder, a serial angel investor, and created Seed Legal so that nobody else has to go to a lawyer when doing their funding rounds. And something, we're 160 people now. We've got a marketing team, sales, customer support, and so on. About 1 in 3 of all early stage funding rounds in the UK is on our platform. But what's interesting is, for me, I'm now in the legal tech business, but my background is like video, and before that, audio with Kazaa. It's a complete change. But one thing I've learned over the years, actually with iPlayer, is being passionate for your customers. And if I can just talk about an anecdote, which isn't quite marketing, but is about user testing back in my iPlayer days. And it might set the tone for why the chat groups and things like that is. When I joined the BBC, the iPlayer, they'd been working on it for a while, and it wasn't really working very well. And so I told the tech team this big list of problems that I'd found, and they went, "No, dude, it's just you, and this one's exceptional, and no one will find that." And they were sort of saying no to everyone. So I thought I need to show them what a real person would find using the product. So I found the group that do user testing, and I said, "I need some user testing." They went, "Great, that will cost £20,000 and take 6 weeks." And it's like, I'm not paying £20,000, and I don't have 6 weeks to wait. So I devised the Anthony chocolate test, which meant I went to the local supermarket, bought some big lint boxes, and then went and found some non-techie people. So I went to level 5 where the legal team are, and said to one of the legal people, "I will give you this fine box of chocolates if you come and test my product." And so the person came down, and the test was a disaster. Everything went wrong, and the developers were like, "Ugh, what's going on?" And then at the end, I said, "Okay, team, we're going to pick the top 3 things that are just screwed up here. And in the next 48 hours, we're going to fix it. And we're going to keep doing this until we've got a product." And actually, it took a bit longer than 2 days, but not that much longer. And we did this about 4 times until the next chocolate box person said, "Yes, I like EastEnders." And there it is on the homepage. And oh, wow, it plays. So I learned somewhat on the job, and obviously beforehand as well, that the person heading things up needs to spend quality time with customers. And I think, a key message from the way that we work at Seed Legals, and one of the things to impart here is the CEO, in an early stage startup, the CEO is often talking to customers because they had the idea and so on. But later on, it's easy to get divorced from that, and they just go and, shuffle spreadsheets around. But I'm obsessed with, spreading knowledge and getting feedback from customers. I don't know if there's any other company where customers keep writing to the CEO directly with feedback, largely good, sometimes not good, and I always look to act on it. So to me, it's that sort of obsession, which, by the way, might be completely wrong for a CEO. I'm not claiming this is a good thing, but if you're in a large company, it might be interesting, and I'd love in the chat your thoughts about, does your CEO, if you're not the CEO here, get hugely involved directly with customers, or do they assume someone else will do it? And how do you leverage that community? So that's the backstory on me. And then we can talk about PLG versus CLG when you're ready.
That's insane. What a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that. And like, it's funny when you sort of speak through that, because again, as a customer, I remember I was sat at a train station one day, and I think I asked a question in the WhatsApp group, and you replied. And there was something really interesting about that from the other side of this experience, which was there was a little ping of like, "Hey, I know that guy's the CEO, and he's paying attention to me," and there was almost like that little thing which also reinforced the value of the platform to me, which was really interesting. There's a couple of comments in the chat here sort of saying the CEO doesn't get involved at all. So maybe this is within the first 9 minutes, a prompt for folks to go, let's see that, because you are a walking proof of it working.
Yeah, and I'm not sure the comment "no way CEO gets involved" is a comment to go, "No way you should get involved, dude. You're doing the CEO thing wrong," or "Oh, there's no way our CEO. We need to have a talk with him or her about that." So,
Yes.
but I'm sure we'll continue along this thread, and it'll be an interesting discussion. Okay.
Absolutely, I love that, and so we've got Alex sort of encouragingly saying that we're a small team of 7, so our CEO does have one-to-one conversations. So it's interesting with that transition point as well, for sure. So that's really, really interesting. The context for today's conversation was around the WhatsApp group, and you've spoken to it a little bit, but at some point along your journey with Seed Legals, you must have decided, okay, we want to create an area where we can interact with folks. And eventually you came to the idea of WhatsApp. So could you speak to that? Because that's interesting in itself.
So it's a great point. So, what we've realized is when we started, we built a legal tech platform. So instead of going to a law firm, you come to us. But when we started, we have no idea whether we would be like the AWS of law firms, where we'd have lots of developers and we'd never talk to a human, or people would want to, like a law firm, but with a fancy website, which I desperately didn't want to do. And it turns out we've netted out somewhere in the middle, where our platform builds all the documents. If you know what you want, the platform does it. But you still need to, many times, you want to speak to a human. You want to ask them advice. And this will be interesting. Will AI replace that or not? So my team then would then talk to customers, and you'd hit the web chat and so on. But we thought, could we go further? Could we, if we wanted to scale this, my goal is to offer unlimited help and support, but that means your support team keeps growing exponentially. How can you scale that? So AI is now a late breaking possible addition. They've not let our AI bot loose on people because it just gets it wrong too much. But my mantra is, the third time somebody asks you something, write an article, and then you can start suggesting the article. So you can, offer unlimited help, but do it in a more and more efficient way. And one thought, of course, was to create a community group where people could help each other. So I'm going to go in the next few minutes through the type of community groups, because it was super interesting, and what works and what didn't. So the first question is, do you start your own group or do you join other people's groups? So we started by joining other groups. There are Slack groups, there are WhatsApp groups, and there are specialty apps like Guild and so on. And what we found is that, I'm a member of quite a few founder groups. The WhatsApp has by far the world's worst interface. It is rubbish. You can't have threaded conversations. It beeps in the middle of the night. You can't differentiate between, group and your mother calling you in the middle of the night and so on. The threaded conversations don't work. They get lost in the thread. It's terrible, but that is where all the action is. Then there are Slack groups, and there are various types of Slack groups. Some have got more buzz than others, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But it's a bit more effort to have Slack open or get notified and then go through the different groups. And then there's specialty apps. So one of the joys at Seed Legals is a good fraction of all startups are on our platform, and we love giving business back to our customers. And one of the customers is Guild, and they make an app that is a communities for businesses, and it's got all the features that Slack and WhatsApp don't have. But the problem is people have to go and get the app. So we created a group, but then I found the problem was, and this is really core to the problem I have, and I'm really intrigued as to whether those on the call have the problem as well, which is my team kept going, Anthony, we need to create a community group, and we will moderate it and we'll hop in and do things. So we created a Slack group and a Guild group and a WhatsApp group. And then my team just bailed, and they went, we've got too many other things to do. And with rare exception, they kind of leave it to me. So it's like I'm left with the baby. And so what we found is the place where the action really happens the most is in our WhatsApp group. But there's another startup group called Anonymous Founders, which is hugely popular. And that's probably the most popular group of all, and that's a Slack group. So what's interesting is that one is anonymous. Everyone's got a handle, and you can ask questions anonymously, which then comes to, I think, one of the key things that makes a community group work or not, which is what is its purpose and who controls it if it's got a controller, and who moderates it. So I think the challenge is when we created a startup group, Seed Legal's founders group, people have an expectation that they kind of need to say things that are nice to us. They can't say anything that disses us. They can't ask about our competitors. They can't suggest a competitor. It's like, inviting people around to dinner, you kind of controlling it, which means the questions in it are all about things that they're kind of expecting we or other people to help with around our platform, which is great. It is obviously a much smaller set of things. But then you go to the anonymous founders, or you go to groups that we don't, run, and there people ask anything. And sometimes they might talk about a competitor, or somebody might ask, what should I use for my option scheme? And somebody might mention us and a competitor. So those have much more chat. And actually, sometimes people aren't saying things that are the best about you or recommending someone else, but it's a fantastic learning tool, because in our group, it's more like a broadcast where we, and often me, answer people's questions. But in the other group, I'm actually getting my marketing intel from that. And that's invaluable. And I'm now looking to launch Seed Legals in the US. But I don't know what the US proposition is. So I'm now joining a bunch of US groups. It's much cheaper than flying to New York, and I can then find out what people are talking about. And so there's one more thing, which is what's really interesting. There's a group, a company called Startup Network Europe, and they've got different WhatsApp groups for UK, London, Ireland, and France, and some others. And I'm a member of those three. And what's really fascinating is how the interactions are different between them. So the Startup Network London is of like 300 or 400 people, and they ask great questions, but they're all like really narrowly focused on fundraising. Should I use HubSpot versus Pipedrive, or what's the CPM or CPA you would pay, or should you advertise on Twitter? They're kind of targeted, and there's a decent amount of traffic on it. And I hop in and answer things when it's useful, and I stay silent on others. But then there is Startup Network France, and there people introduce themselves and then nobody says anything ever again. It's really weird. The French is like, either they have no questions or they're embarrassed to ask questions, but it's like silence.
Interesting.
And then there's Startup Network Ireland, which is like you've wandered into the pub. It's insane. About a quarter of all the messages are removed by the admin because they contravene editorial policy, and it's anything from Gaza deleted through to fundraising, through Paddy, I'll meet you at the pub later. So it's a bit like just a meeting place. So my take, for anyone listening is, should you run a group or should you join someone else's group? And what do you want from the group? So for the group that we run, it's kind of it's creating a community, which we think is important. In fact, we renamed our subscription plan from subscribe to join as a member, which means that you are not just getting access to a platform, you're getting access to a community. And then we want to do a lot more community events. We do lunches for some of our members, and an awards ceremony and so on. And the group is one of those. But there, I think people are expecting you to moderate the group, make sure it's on point, remove anyone who's out of line. And whereas when you join someone else's group, you're a guest and you have to be not self-promotional. You might drop in a few hints about your company when it's a solution to a problem, but you're always there to give help. And I think those who realize it and provide unbiased advice, sometimes there's a link to an article on your site, and I think that's kind of the gentle upsell. So that was the whole thing from me on groups. I hope it answered the questions.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Sorry, you took an in-breath there, so I'm gonna let you carry on if you have another point.
No, I just saw a question about LinkedIn. So it's quite interesting. So there are Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups, and the question is why some are quite buzzy and some not. And I think a lot comes down to the feeling of the purpose of the group. Does it feel like it's led by somebody, and you're on guard, or you can't ask very much? And also it's about how much the moderator polices things. So my last startup was essentially called Six Tribes, which was a social network, and people created tribes. And I was worried that, like Twitter, it would be filled with,
Banter.
vile stuff.
Yeah.
It turned out, for the most part, people were delightful and really nice to each other. But the real problem wasn't, flame wars. It was people just posting mere content. And
Mm.
what I realized is the groups or the tribes that were the most successful were the ones where the moderator just, it wasn't getting rid only of the flame war people, which was infrequent, but it's getting rid of just the mere content. And
Mm.
looking at, for example, at this startup network Ireland, it's anyone who's off topic, it gets deleted. So you might look at your feed and go, the last 8 things were just deleted. And the moderator's trying to get it on point. Whereas in Facebook groups, the ones you just stop, getting, or LinkedIn ones, where the moderator's just letting random people post their, Indian SEO company, and then you just leave. But,
Mm.
but, getting it zinging is super critical. And I don't know the formula. I was watching a program on iPlayer on Studio 54, which is brilliant. And somehow the club in New York, which went insanely popular, somehow they got just the right formula of influencers, buzz, great decor to make it take off until they were arrested for tax evasion. Um, and but others just didn't take off, and maybe that's exactly the point here, is how to get it to take off, and the community to help themselves, and you learn from it and contribute.
100%. I want to ask you off the back of all of that, like, how much did you walk into all of this with an intention of creating the culture which you have subsequently ended up with, versus how much the culture has evolved? Because it feels like that's what you're speaking about to a certain extent, is a cultural sort of thing.
You're absolutely right. And for me, I'm not a marketer by background, right? I'm a kind of coder, hardware designer. So I've stumbled into the space, and it turns out that I've got quite a passion for helping our customers. And I've realized, in a sense, that one way to scale the business is if you can reach an audience through a group, then you can answer something for 100 people instead of answering 100 individual people once each. So
Yes.
I think there's a community benefit, but I just love that. I love the interaction. I love helping, and it shows. Whether I should do it or not is, but I think um, if I look at my competitors, whether it be law firms or other legal tech companies, they're all these sort of somewhat faceless organizations, and you phone them and you book a meeting. So I like to think, what are my competitors doing? And I'm going to do completely the opposite. There's no way they're running WhatsApp groups. There's no way that they're giving advice on things. Um, and then you can start using data, and you can start answering with an article. So there's a lot to be had. So for me, I think there is definitely a passion. And if you get it right, if you're a marketer and you have people and you're engaged in a group and you get great feedback, it's quite a buzz every day, and it's also quite addictive. You wake up and there's new messages, and you've got to do the messages. Now, one thing I want to talk about is community-led growth versus product-led growth. And I don't know who in the audience knows the terms PLG and CLG.
Yeah.
And I'm quite late to the party on that. But PLG, product-led growth, is you build it and they will come.
Yeah.
And community-led growth is you work the community and you hang out where your users are, and you get the network effect as they talk to each other. And if I look at how our company has grown, in particular the UK and France, and compare and contrast, our growth in the UK has been a lot faster than in France, where we have a small team. It's growing very nicely, but it's nowhere near the UK. And I think the difference is, in France, we've relied on product-led growth. The team builds something, and then you have some webinars and you do some marketing and so on. But you hope people will come. And in the UK, I mean, last year, at the end of the year, I looked through my Outlook, and I did 140 events, which were a combination of webinars, podcasts, physical events in the evening, and so on. And being part of that community, I think, made all the difference. So
Yes.
if you can leverage community and tie that with your product and have your team be seen to be going out of their way, I think that's the win-win. Now, of course, is the space we're in really unique? If you're doing jam or surfboards or insurance, can you match the equivalent? And you may have a bit of work to do, but I think that is the case. And if you can, by the way, one thing, and I know we're digressing from the questions, but what's interesting, this might be useful for anyone looking at this, which is in the area that products we offer, we do funding rounds, and funding rounds are for startups, and there are a certain number of them in London and the UK, and they tend to go to similar events. So you can turn that into a community. But we also do R&D tax claims. So, every company that spends money can claim money back from the government. And there, like every company in the UK, well, I mean, like half of them can qualify, and there's no community. So targeting that as a community just isn't going to work. And there, I kind of need to do PPC ads against all my competitors or find some way to use AI to come up with better messaging. Whereas if you can identify a community and then serve or super serve that community, that's the trick. So, it's, how can you find that community?
Yeah.
And does your business naturally have a community? And that I don't know the answer, what the percent that do.
Well, I just adore it. And like hearing you speak, Anthony, it's wonderful because first off, clear passion, like clear passion for helping people, customers. I've lived it, I've experienced it, I've seen it, I've seen you do it outside of this context. But then also B, sort of energy, sort of um, dedicated to doing these things, to turning up at the events, to turning up at the podcast, to being involved in those things. So I think that's really important because I don't think that's a given. I don't think that's a given for a CEO or a leader or whatever to show up with these things. But the thing I wanted to point out as a combination of this to the folks listening is like, I also think of you as a really busy, really savvy business person. And so for you to be sort of endorsing this uh, as something which has helped your business grow in a very significant way, I think that's a really strong endorsement that I just wanted to highlight because I think so often these things we get hung up as marketers about attribution, about digital attribution in particular. But actually, what you're doing is turning up to an event and you're going, "Hi, this is us," and etc. etc. in the same way as you are in the WhatsApp group. That feels really important and just like a really strong point for folks to sort of think about prioritizing this because I think that's really really important.
Yeah. And
Really well done.
so thank you. And I think, a goal is also building thought leadership. So, in the field of law, there are lots of law firms. It's a huge market. They've been there like since Queen Elizabeth, the first, not the second. And, and now a young startup, like 6 or 7 years old, capturing a third of the some market share of some segment of it.
Yes.
So, you start with the who are you guys? We're lawyers. We've been here since, Queen Victoria, or whatever. And now how are you going to change that? And I think you change that by just serving customers at a lower cost, but then you don't want to be seen as just a lower cost base solution, the Tesco of it. So now you start using data because you're doing volume, and then you've got data. Now you can turn that into thought leadership pieces, and then you can think about how you do things differently to the incumbents and you leverage that. The law firm will tell you 12 things you could do, and I'll tell you one thing you should do based on data. And then you run the communities because your competitors aren't running the communities. So I
Yes.
like to think what my competitors are doing and they do completely the opposite.
I love that. My co-founder posted about you today, and he said, "I love an outlier," which I think applies. Um, Part of the promise of today's session was speaking about how we use community subsequently as a content tool, and you've already alluded to it because you mentioned if someone asks something 3 times, then that's when you produce a piece of content off the back of it. But could you speak a little bit more to that? Because I think that's a really interesting mechanism of using a private community to turn it into something that feeds the rest of our marketing activity, which that was really interesting. That was one of those light bulb moments for me when you and I spoke before. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Okay. So, I mean, if you think about your sales team, they would be doing the same thing again and again with each customer going through the same thing, and they might be answering the same questions.
Yes.
So, one of the things I like to do is the software eats the world. Again, thinking, what are my competitors doing? They're manual businesses. Can I use software to do things more efficiently so I can provide a great customer experience, but be more efficient each time? And that's where I think, firstly, content comes in. So maybe it's the software developer in me. I hate doing anything more than once. So
Yes.
if somebody asks, my mantra with the team is the third time somebody asks you to do something, asks you a question, write an article. And
Yes.
now we've got the dawn of AI, and AI can start, parsing these articles. Today, it's not good enough to let loose on customers because it just gets it wrong, and people like to talk to a human. But
Mhm.
that will change, and it can start suggesting it. So once you've got content, then how can you leverage that? Well, you've got thought leadership pieces. You can publish that as posts on LinkedIn, and then when people ask questions in startup groups, instead of writing a lengthy reply, you can have an article. And one of the things I really love is I put insane amounts of time into writing articles. I mean, I must have written like hundreds of them. And what I very much enjoy is when people do ask a question, I can actually answer with an article. And it turns out a good fraction of things people ask, I've written an article. And if I haven't written an article, I'll often go off and write a short article so that that's the answer to it. So to me, there's a sort of thinking of the software eats the world way of thinking.
Yeah.
You can look to use tech to do everything more efficiently, and that can include, communities. One thing noting is that I actually I tweeted the other day, which is, we all know about hashtag no filter
Mhm.
for Insta. I think we're entering the hashtag no AI,
Yeah.
because we all recognize an AI resume or LinkedIn outreach, and it's like, if you send a LinkedIn an AI generated resume, I'm not sure it's an instant delete, but it's probably not going to go very far.
Yes.
So, I think we're all recognizing that, and that's what you want is the genuine. And if you can, and that means your team really need to have their unique tone of voice and be genuine. And one of the things we might cover, if you want, is how you get your whole team to have a unified, tone of voice. And is that the CEOs or one of the founders, or does it come organically from the team?
Mhm. No, that's bang on. And I guess, one of the points that I just wanted to loop together those bits of the conversation, because presumably you can also do the same for these when you're part of other people's groups, you can recognize the same trends and still write the same articles and do it the same way. So for anyone watching in who's like, oh, I don't own a WhatsApp group or I don't have a Slack channel or whatever, the same theory applies. If you're part of these communities, you can really recognize the problems rather than sort of spending your time.
And by the way, you should give it a go. Don't feel worried about creating a community and then sunsetting it afterwards.
Yeah.
We've created some that just didn't take off that much, and so you don't have to kill it. So you still get notified if somebody posts something, but people just vote and with their feet or fingers and go elsewhere. So if you're wondering, should I start a community? Try to find some people in the company who will, at least they tell you they will, go and spend time in it. Maybe make a rota so somebody every day goes and, checks posts. You don't want people, posting things to you and then no one replying. But the barrier to creating a WhatsApp group and other is fairly low. WhatsApp used to be limited to 256, now it's 1,000 or something.
Yeah.
Some people make communities with sub communities. That looks a bit complicated, but I think it's far, far better to have tried than not to have tried.
Absolutely, bang on. And these things are so low cost, low friction to set up that it's really important that if you want to give it a go, you feel like you can. There's 13 open questions from the community I can see right now. Folks, if you're watching in and you would like to give a thumbs up to some of the questions that we should prioritize, please do give a thumbs up in the Q&A to the ones you want answering, because we'll make sure that we get to those. I can see that the first question is actually from my good friend James, who it comes a little bit back down to the cultural point that we were speaking about earlier. But James is asking how you position the WhatsApp group in seed legals so it doesn't sound like you're going to get sold to. And I guess framing that for folks in other organizations, they're always fearful that, it may appear that way. So how did you sort of get past that? You're going to be
So
sold to.
this is for customers perceiving that it was a sales channel for them.
Absolutely.
Um, it's something you have to be eternally vigilant on, both in your own group and when you're a guest in others. And if you're too silly, then people will just leave, and or they'll you know ban you and or your content. So I think the key thing is that what's interesting is some of the questions people are going to be asking are things that are relevant to your business, but some things are just irrelevant. So, I mean, we're a legal tech platform. We're helping you with your funding round, but people will be asking all the things that startup founders want to know from others, and a lot of it's marketing. What CRM, or anyone got a discount code with AWS or HubSpot? I mean, those are really popular things. So the number one thing is don't be salesy, otherwise you're going to have a dead group,
Yeah.
and unless the group is specific. But you don't have any groups that you've joined for companies that want to sell things, and I think maybe that's the problem. The company justifies internally a budget for whatever for creating a group, and then gets super salesy on it. I know some of my team members will post events, and it always is a slightly cringe thing for me. It's like, I'm not sure I would have said that. That's a bit salesy. Let's not do that again, or let's make it informative. So you have to. I mean, the key contract, in a sense, you have with the group members is that you're there to provide, the nightclub experience such that everyone has a good time. And if you start dominating it too much, then everyone's going to leave. So you have to be quite careful, and that means often when you do have the answer to a problem, try to create it in a way. So an example, for example, in the anonymous founders group, somebody asked a question about, it just happened, we've got a product, and they said, should I go to, Seed Legals or somebody else for one of these contracts, or should I roll my own?
Yeah.
And I think rolling your own, I mean, it's a product I sell. So
Mhm.
my answer was, there are many types of contracts. Some of them, knock yourself out, roll your own. This one, you definitely don't want to do it for these reasons.
Right.
But then I ended with, but by the way, if you wanted one of these, knock yourself out and roll your own. So it
Yes.
was really giving advice. And then at the end, I made sure that it didn't come across as me self-serving, selling something by going, this is unique. Otherwise, go for it.
So
So yes.
it feels important, and I think it's just really refreshing to hear it from you because um, these are all of the things that we hear as good pieces of advice. So often, don't feel like you have to sell, etc., etc. But ultimately, when the rubber hits the road, sometimes, and it goes through an approval process of, hey, we're going to start a WhatsApp group, or hey, we're going to start a community, and 10 different people get involved, and eventually what happens is you do end up in that situation where it feels something very inorganic, and you end up with exactly the opposite of what you've spoken about today. And so I think this is why I wanted to get you on today, because it feels like you're taking the advice, or at least intuitively doing the things that feel right. um, and the result is something that's really, really vibrant, which is fabulous.
I think
I want,
I think each post you should think, is this really providing, unbiased value for the audience? And if not, rethink it. And incredibly valuable these groups are to just get intel from what people are asking. And often the things that people are asking is a key for the products you might want to build. So that's free, product discovery, something you'd have spent a lot on focus groups. You're just hearing if people keep asking for one of these things, and you could build that. But you may get feedback on pricing. Hey, what's the price? Well, how much are you paying for it? Great. I didn't know my competitor was discounting that. So,
yes,
so being part of those is really important. But then it means you can't dominate the conversation.
absolutely. It's marketing 101, really, which is, it's good to see it in action. Um, I wanted to pick up on a question from Kaylee, because we'll loop back around to the top question from Simon in a moment, but it was on topic, which was, how do you tackle deleting or not sharing quote unquote meh content if you want everyone to feel valued? Because presumably you may have had those moments within even the WhatsApp group where um, you go, like, come on, we can do better or whatever. And again, it comes down to that cultural thing, I think. But how do you delete stuff or not share it, or whatever, so that you don't lose that momentum in the group because you put it out in the world and then you sort of see what
Yeah.
comes.
It's a really critical question. I don't claim to know the answer, but I think there are, obviously your nuclear options are to delete a post or to ban someone entirely from the group.
Mhm.
But I mean, that doesn't feel nice to do, right? So
Yes.
options before that is you could just DM the person directly and say, hey, can we not do this? You could also post publicly, hey, can we keep it clean? No LinkedIn profiles, please.
Yeah.
It's only about questions, not about promotion. So you should constantly reinforce the values of the group.
Mhm.
And then when there's somebody, I would say, out of line, not egregiously out of line, you have a gentle post that says, hey, a reminder that, the group is for this, and then people get it. If you do it right, others will hop in ahead of you to do that. And actually, over the weekend in our group, I DM'd one of the members and said, actually, what you're doing is seriously cool. If you just wrote a 4-line post with no emoji, no spammy things, not 12 lines, you'd actually get people wanting it. So for me, the idea was trying to educate them. I mean, at some point, if they keep doing it, they will get removed.
Mhm.
But so far, today's post was actually a really nice short post asking a question. So maybe they got it, and then everyone else gets it. And I think it's just like your leadership team in your company. If the CEO and the senior leadership team, their behaviors, on Slack, in the office, are the cultures that pervade the rest of the company. And so I think if it's your group, then the posts that you make, people will pick up from that. And if you're spammy or talk about the football or whatever, then it will just go all over the show. And if you keep it focused, then I hope that people get it. And then occasionally you'll have an outlier about SEO from India, and then that one
Yeah.
should be gotten rid of. Yeah.
It is, and the word that you used as part of the answer was kindness. You sort of lead with kindness, and then folks, sort of respond in turn. It's almost always been my experience. We speak to thousands of people every week, and I can count on one hand the amount of times where we've had a bad interaction, and they have been outliers. So, just as a point of encouragement for folks watching, like, feel comfortable that the worst case scenario fairly rarely happens. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't, but if you put in the right moderation, you treat people with kindness, then it is an encouragement rather than something to be feared. I think.
And by the way, that is the key fear for starting a community. And that's what kept us from not doing it for quite a few years, actually, which is, are you going to put the time into moderation? What if people start, bad mouthing your company? What if they start talking about random political stuff?
Yeah,
It could go out of control. But
yeah,
actually, you realize quite quickly, I mean, it will vary. If you're doing a political one, it's probably not good. But if you're doing one that is, B2B SaaS business or something,
yeah,
um, your customers or the members of the community you'll, be surprised how nice people are and how much they want to help each other. And they may start connecting, off community or DMing each other. And it's wonderful to see those little seeds, sprouting and turning into something more. And if you could created that, then that's brilliant. And the best feeling is when people start recommending your service and answering questions you would have answered. So I
yeah.
now wake up in the morning and people have already answered questions that people, others have asked of me, and other community members like, dude, that's really good. You have to be a bit careful if they give the wrong answer, but still, yeah.
It's bang on, and to pick up on that point, a wonderful business justification for engaging in these things, because as you mentioned it earlier as well, as a support cost thing, you can reduce the amount of time you spend on support drastically, both through the listening you've spoken about, but also through customers answering other people's questions, which is really lovely. I want to pick up on the question from Laura, which comes from the opposite side of what we've just been speaking about, which is your tactics for encouraging people to engage if the conversation is looking a bit thin. Have you ever experienced that where it's just gone dead and you've gone, oh, all goodness, and how you dealt with that?
Great point, actually. And yes, some groups, like in fact this French one,
Mhm.
I've tried posting a few things to kind of wake up the patients on their deathbed. to
Yep.
to do something. But the uh, I think if there's no action,
Mhm.
the question is are people in the group for the wrong reasons? You've gotten people to join a group by posting to all of your customers or posting on LinkedIn. People have joined expecting something. And it turned out that what they were expecting isn't delivered or is not deliverable at all. And therefore, like you've invited people to a party and they've arrived and gone, dude, why am I here? Is it for the drinks, the artwork? Is there a marriage happening here? And they're just not sure why they're there. And I
Mhm.
think in this French startup group, the person who started it had a great list of people, invited them, but never really got to explain why they were there. So people aren't sure. Should they ask questions? Should they share war stories? Or should they help others? And so it's an indication that it's a problem looking for a solution, or a solution looking for a problem, I should say. And those are the ones I think are not working. And then once you see that, either you work out what people might really be wanting to talk about, or you just realize you should not spend time on it. And people probably stay members of it, and one day somebody will ask a question, it'll light up in their WhatsApp or Slack. But until then, it is what it is.
Nice. I really appreciate that answer, and I think it rings true to our experience of things. So we've previously ran a Facebook group, and we've also started WhatsApp groups. And the exercise that we went through before we started both of these things was writing down the values that we expected and the behaviors, and just making it super clear. And those, I'm not the world's most assertive person. It will surprise and shock you. But one of the things that did right from the off was give folks that clarity of this is how I behave in this place, and to your point about the stuff that you just spoke about, this is what I should be doing. And it's funny because in the Q&A right now, there's a question we recently launched in WhatsApp groups, and they're asking how it's going, and it's making me think, speaking to you, that we should be far more clear about those sort of things, because like it's uh it's just so important, to sort of set those expectations right from the off. So I'm learning a lot here as well, so thank you very much. I really appreciate that
By the
as
way, if you create a Slack group, then you've got one of the challenges of how many channels do you create. So
yes.
WhatsApp essentially only has one channel, right? Which means the channel is busy. And if you don't go to it for 2 days, it's like you've completely lost in the noise. But with Slack, you can have one, for, CRM systems, fundraising, ask me anything, whatever. But the more channels you have, the more, dispersed the conversation is,
Mm-hmm.
but you know where to go. So the fact you've got channels is indicating what the group is about and where people should post things. If you make too many, then people don't join all of them, and then what happens is the events channel's got 200 people and the general channel's got 1,000 people, so everyone posts in the general channel. So you do have some structural issues. You might make everyone join every channel by default,
Mm-hmm.
but these are the joys of the community management.
Bang on, absolutely. I want to pick up on that community management piece again, and sort of loop it into the thing about fear, um, because I think this would be a reason why folks, say for example, I used to work at an e-commerce marketing agency, and one of the things that we could have done is bring together our various customers and say, look, we're just going to have a bit of an e-com chat here, and it's an opportunity for you to meet one another. We become the central point for that conversation. Now, the e-com agency I worked for was great, so this is not specific about them. But one of the things that I'm sure we would have feared had I been in that situation would have been like the customers piling on, so had something gone wrong, say for example on Black Friday, and everyone was stressing, they're putting in the WhatsApp group, etc., etc. So I just wanted to loop back round to that point about fear, and your thought process on whether you worried whether customers would start having bad conversations about seed legals with one another when you invited them into this environment, and if you did, like how you dealt with that internally.
So it's a great question, and it's one of the fear for doing these groups. It might be self-reinforcing good or self-reinforcing bad. I mean, you might start with thinking the overall karma of your company. If people generally love what you do, maybe it's a good thing. If people generally whinging and your Trustpilot scores are like not very good, maybe the group is a less good thing to do. Sometimes you will get somebody who's got a payment dispute and then wants to vent or whatever. I guess the thought is if you give people a place to vent, then they will vent. But the challenge is if you don't give people a place to vent, they're going to vent on Twitter and on Trustpilot or wherever it is. And so people always have a venue to vent. And you might think about rather than I'm going to let people whinge to each other, you may turn out that it's better they whinge here, where it might turn out your other customers go, actually, no, dude, you're wrong. This was great. And I found occasionally when people have something that they didn't like, others will pile in and go, no, actually, it works great, or we didn't have the same feeling. Now, they might be going off on DMs separately, um, but I think if it feels like the company that's creating the channel and contributing to it, their intention is genuine and they're genuinely trying to be helpful, then I think people will respond accordingly. If it sounds and feels like a sales channel or something, then you will get that kind of behavior. Now, by the way, one interesting dilemma is, my marketing or sales team are sometimes saying you should create these groups only for paying customers or only for top tier paying customers. And I feel that we should do it for anyone who wants to join because it's lead gen. So one of them is the approach is like it's a VIP members club. And the other approach is actually it's customer lead gen and customer service, and you should make it as widely open as possible. I don't know the answer. I do like the concept of the VIP one, and this becomes a reason for being on the top tier plan or a most valued customer, or you get invited.
Mhm.
But on the flip side, all the effort that you're putting into moderating, creating content, doing posts and so on, you're reaching a smaller audience than you could have done otherwise. I don't know the answer, but it's definitely one to think about. And certainly your sales team is probably going to be pushing you to create communities for top tier customers as an upsell mechanism. But on the flip side, you're losing customer acquisition by doing that.
Absolutely. Well, and to the point of the content discussion that we had earlier, then you may be losing the conversation about acquisition as well. So you may be losing out on the FAQs that people are asking about your service. So it is an interesting thing. I mean, I guess there's an argument for both as well, right? You could have a VIP and a more general chat. I don't know whether folks would do both, but it's a curious thing. Um, I want to pick up on the question from Simon, which was also mirrored in the chat. And it may just be a couple of sentences, this one, or it may be much longer. But Simon's asking how you go about finding your various WhatsApp groups, because you listed off like 10, just like off the bat. Is it just by being involved in the community that you find these things out, or how are you going about finding these things? Because for other folks, part of your advice earlier on was about joining some other groups and stuff like that. How did you start your journey of doing that?
Right, it's a good point because if you use Guild, there's a directory of apps and you can join and so on. Whereas unless I'm missing something in WhatsApp, there's no like master directory. You have to hear from somebody, but which is a bit weird. And then some of them you have to ask the admin to let you in, and some you have an invite link. And maybe all of this adds a bit to the mystique. Hey, I'm in this group and I have no idea how to let other people in, and I'm in, so I better use it. I don't know. I think it is the case that the more you network, the more you find these groups and people invite you to others. And now the question is, maybe that's something that you do. You post the link to all of your customers
Mhm.
so that they can join your group. Um, I don't know the answer, but it is a bit of a black art. And I know there are all these groups that I could join. I don't know if I should or how to. Um, so yeah, no, I totally don't know the answer to that. And maybe there is a startup opportunity for something that lists, all WhatsApp groups and puts them in a directory. That would be quite interesting.
Yeah, I feel like it's the type of thing that now you've said those words out loud, it's probably going to exist in 10 days and the domain's going to. I kind of get those vibes. But I feel like you're also doing the right thing, Simon, by turning up to events. I'm not trying to blow our own horn here, but like TMM, because you start to meet other people and you find out about these things. That's exactly how I found like an ad tech group that I'm part of, and so on and so forth. So that's really useful. Hopefully that helps, Simon. Let's take the last question, I think, from Paul. Paul is asking about group size, and for groups and online communities, do you think bigger is always better, or has there, in your experience, been a Goldilocks sweet spot where the number of members is not too big or too small? I don't know whether we can get a number from you. I doubt that, but what's been your experience in terms of joining some of the bigger ones versus some of the smaller groups?
That's a really great question. I mean, I had my starting assumption is bigger is better,
Hmm.
because more people equals more posts. But what I found is that I think in most groups, and Twitter is a perfect example, a small percent of people do the vast majority of the posts. Either they're asking questions or they're answering other people's questions, or they're just the most interesting ones, or maybe they've got too much time on their hands. I don't know the reasons, and so you may find that you've got the sort of rule of 10, which is you've got 100 viewers,
Hmm.
you've got 10 curators, who might follow, like, retweet, etc., and you've got one, creator. And if that's your rule, and maybe that is the general rule, then how do you focus on more creators? The curators are fine; they'll reshare and so on, but they're not contributing content, and it's those that you want. But if you can't change the rules, and by the way, I don't know if yeah, I don't claim it's like an actual mathematical thing, but it seems not far off. The If I look at Anonymous Founders, which has got 2,000 members, there are probably 50 that are most of the content comes from. And I'm definitely one of those 50. And the others are either not there at all or consuming. And then one day they have a question, or they're now confident enough. So I think it's more is better, but to create this sort of safe space so that people who are only reading are still getting value, and people aren't afraid to contribute. So for example, I follow lots of VCs in the US, and you kind of don't want to wade into their discussion because they're all like billionaires and so on, or who are you to come in? So you're kind of afraid to enter that particular party, so you just stay silent, and you want to create this environment where everyone's sort of either got great questions or an expert on something in their area, or going to contribute. And maybe that's the key to that happening one, because once you tease out people with some interesting things and others hop in to answer, it becomes a self-fulfilling, wonderful environment, as opposed to a few people shouting from the parapets and everyone else like maybe there or maybe not.
It's bang on, and as you were speaking, it sort of reminded me of a small tactical point, which is if you're seeing these folks in your group who are the key contributors, to acknowledge these folks, whether it's a DM, and just sort of say, thank you so much. You're doing so much. You're modeling the right behaviors. You're meaningful to this group. I think the power of acknowledgement is something that's really really something. But you could
And
even
by the way, yeah. So, sorry, one thing I try to do is each time I answer a question, you may have seen me do it here as well. Somebody will ask a question that's just relevant to them, and I'll almost always answer it and even say, by the way, the answer to this for everyone else reading this is how it works, and now this is the answer for you. So each answer is not only answering a person's question, it's something to create valuable insight for everyone else in the group.
love that. That's a real inclusivity point, which I really really like. There was the second part of it was just to elevate folks, so you could even give folks like a semi-official title or incentivize them. Whether it's a chocolate for the top poster or whatever. Like particularly in those beginning stages, it's really interesting.
Exactly. And by the way, I can see the great comments from Vanessa about WhatsApp functionality, Hive Index, and yes, please do check out and create a group on Guild, which is a fantastic platform. for business communities and so on, with all the features that WhatsApp doesn't have. So yeah.
Bang on. Anthony, that was really informative. I think for anyone who is looking to just to wrap up, to start a community in a private place. I think we've touched on some really great touch points, some really great advice for doing that. But then also B, sort of looked at the opportunity around content creation, etc. I think that is really interesting. And C, the listening, the enthusiasm, the getting involved. I think it's a really, really great role model for folks who are looking to build a business of real significance. So thank you for spending the time as you have today. Really enjoyed it. You can see some lovely comments coming through for you there, Anthony. So thank you for taking the
Well,
time.
thank you so much. I've dropped my LinkedIn profile. I don't know if that's allowed or not, but if anyone wants to connect, I'm delighted to. And if anyone wants to join any startup communities, I've got some magic links that I can point you to.
Oh,
But thank you so much for having me. And this was a lot of fun and learning for me as well.
I really appreciate it. Thank you to you. Thank you to everyone for taking the time. We're taking a week break next week and we'll be back in 2 weeks. So thank you all very, very much. And we will see you then. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.